This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, France and Germany, Europe's biggest economies, announced lockdowns on Wednesday, and that caused some steep declines across emerging markets today. We saw MSCI's index of emerging market equities falling 0.3% on the day. Still, losses in the index were less than those of its peers in the developed world, thanks to support from Chinese blue chip stocks. Pretty quiet day across Africa's key markets. Egypt and Nigeria were closed for the holiday. In South Africa, the JSE fell almost 1% today. And that's after a bloodbath on Wednesday when the all-share index tanked about 3.28%. That, of course, was after the finance minister presented a mid-term budget pledging to freeze the public wage bill for 3 years to avert a looming debt crisis in the country. Now, also coming up on today's show. Trade officials back to the drawing board after President Trump's administration blocks plans to name Nigeria's former finance minister Okonjo Iweala as WTO Director General. And Egyptian and Sudanese officials discuss plans to build a railway link between the two North African nations. And a post-Brexit deal inches closer into view as talks return to Brussels. Well, we begin the hour tonight in Geneva, where the U.S. is blocking the appointment of Ngozi Okonjo Iweala as the next Director General of the World Trade Organization. Now, Ms. Okonjo Iweala was poised to become the first female and African to lead the global trade watchdog after gaining the support of most of its member states on the 28th of October. Her candidacy, however, has failed to win the support of Washington, as CGTN's Phil Ihaza now explores from Abuja.
In a statement by the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, the U.S. says it's backing Ms. Yu because it believes she's someone with hands-on experience as a trade expert. The statement did not mention Ms. Okonjo Iweala, but highly recommended Ms. Yu for the top job and insisted that the WTO will need all the skills necessary to pick an effective Director General. However, after delegates of the WTO met in Geneva to discuss the appointment, spokesman Keith Rockwell said just one member country did not support Okonjo Iweala out of 164 countries. He says there is consensus for Ms. Okonjo Iweala's appointment and she has the support of the European Union. Ngozi Okonjo Iweala has gathered support over 4 months against 7 other candidates. She campaigned on a broad experience in championing reforms and maintains that the WTO needs her reform credentials and wealth of trade experience. She served as Nigeria's first female finance and foreign minister and has been a development economist at the World Bank for 25 years. Currently, she also serves on Twitter's board of directors, heads the Gavi Vaccine Alliance, and is a special envoy for the World Health Organization's COVID-19 fight. The WTO says it will discuss the issue further on November 9th after the U.S. presidential elections. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Meanwhile, Tunisia's parliament has approved a $211 million loan agreement from the African Development Bank. The funding will help to cushion the North African nation from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Tunisia expects its tourism-reliant economy to shrink by 7% this year and its fiscal deficit to balloon to 14% of GDP. From Tunis, here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi with the details.
The House of People's Representatives in Tunisia passed the draft legislation approving the decree law on the adoption of a loan agreement signed between the country and the African Development Bank. The €180 million loan is part of the Rapid Response Facility to COVID-19, approved by the African Development Bank on April 8th this year. 114 MPs voted for the agreement, which received overwhelming parliamentary support.
The African Development Bank has always been one of Tunisia's best partners, even before the pandemic. The bank provides a funding for concrete projects which have a real impact on the population, like infrastructure, health, education, access to water and sanitization. The support of the AFDB is vital in these difficult times.
The loan aims to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 crisis through job preservation and social inclusion of vulnerable groups, youths and the poor in the short term and economic recovery in the medium term.
The loan we've approved is necessary to limit the negative repercussions of the pandemic on employment and the social situation. The number of people and businesses who were the first victims of the crisis is rising.
According to the COVID-19 task force, the AFDB loan will also be used to support implementation of the health response in the North African state.
The number of victims is on the rise. We feel the pressure on health facilities. That's why we need additional funding and financial support to provide the equipment and to improve the service at hospitals and to save more lives.
During a face-to-face and an online meeting bringing together representatives of a number of international financial institutions and donors financing Tunisia, representatives of foreign banks, including AFDB, emphasized their commitment to further strengthen their role in enabling the country to better manage the current health crisis. Since the outbreak of the pandemic 7 months ago, Tunisian authorities have mobilized over $500 million to help thousands of enterprises and millions of citizens. Experts estimate that the country needs an additional funding of over $1 billion to mitigate the negative repercussions of the pandemic. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, let's now go back to one of our top stories today. Of course, the process to appoint a new WTO DG has hit a roadblock as the U.S. vetoes Okonjo Iweala's bid. Now, let's get some more insight into the recent events surrounding the process. We're now joined by Odinaka Anudu. He's a trade and economy editor at Business Day Nigeria. Great to have you on the show with us, sir. Now, most of us thought that Okonjo Iweala was basically a lock to be the consensus pick at the WTO, but now it certainly seems like she's not a sure pick. We've seen the U.S. resisting her appointment. China has been mostly silent on their choice. Now, given that there needs to be a consensus of all the WTO's 164 members, are we heading towards a stalemate?
Thank you very much for having me. Let me say that there is not going to be a stalemate because the process of selecting the WTO DG is always by consensus. But in the event where there is no consensus, there's likely going to be a kind of qualified majority, voting by qualified majority. That has never happened before, and we don't anticipate that happening now. But we expect that after the US election, there will likely be a renegotiation. So we are not looking at stalemate because the rules are very clear that if there is no consensus, what everybody should do is to do what is called qualified majority. In that case, Ngozi Okonjo Iweala might likely get a slot.
You're quite right. And you also mentioned the U.S. election, which has become a major factor in this WTO race. Now, we already know where Trump's administration stands. But is it exactly clear what to expect from a Biden administration?
Well, the point is that a lot of people are expecting that Biden will be different. But Biden's trade policy has not been very clear. It has not been very apparent. So, for instance, he talked about, reducing dependence on China, which is almost the same thing Trump has been talking about for more than 4 years now, or about 4 years now. He also talked about Made in America. He recently launched Made in America, which is also one of the major issues around the world at the moment. So, but one thing I know is that Biden is going to be a little bit different from Trump. Yes, he may not be completely different from Trump in terms of deviating with Trump's economic policy and protectionism, but he will likely, renegotiate terms with China. He will likely renegotiate terms with WTO. So I don't personally think that Biden will be much different, but he's not going to be as aggressive as Trump has been. That's my take, because I've looked at his trade policy since the campaign, and I haven't really seen any clear departure with the past or with Trump's past.
Quite right. Well, let's move on. The EU's 27 member states have rallied behind Ngozi Okonjo Iweala. Now, some say one of the key reasons is to advance the bloc's goal of strengthening its strategic ties with Africa. How would an Okonjo Iweala tenure at the WTO achieve that goal?
In fact, it is very important for the world to understand that Ngozi Okonjo Iweala's tenure is, the world is expecting her tenure to bring about trade. Because if you look at the 10 principles of economics, which was propounded by Professor Mankey of Harvard University, he talked about number 5, which is trade. That trade is always good for everyone. Everyone will always benefit from trade. So what am I trying to say? Africa, for example, is coming up with African Continental Free Trade in January. Her tenure is expected to advance that. And you know that in as much as African Continental Free Trade Area is an African thing, it's also a global phenomenon, because it's going to be the largest, trading bloc after WTO. And I also want to talk about trade between EU and Africa. For quite some time now, Africa has been exporting mostly raw materials to the EU. Trade between Africa and EU is about 7%. That is when you talk about Africa's export to the EU is about 7%. But EU export to Africa has been around 28 to 30%. But Asia to EU, if you look at Asia exports to EU, it's about 46%. EU to Asia, it has been about 28 to 37%. So what that means is that EU is expecting that her tenure will expand trade between that bloc and Africa. There is a need for the two blocs to trade, because trade makes everyone better. This principle of competitive and comparative advantage is what the world is expecting Okonjo Iweala to advance. So I do not personally think that blocking her WTO will really make a lot of sense. Now let me also talk about China. China is a little bit, China is not neutral. It has a candidate in Okonjo Iweala, but China is treading softly because it doesn't want to, be locked into another crisis with the United States of America. It's only watching to see what the outcome of the election, US election, will be.
Quite right. But at the same time, there has also been a lot of discussion around the WTO's diminishing role as the arbiter of global trade disputes. And of course, that's against a backdrop of this pandemic, a global recession, and the US-China trade war. So give us a sense of what is at stake for this new DG pick besides Africa.
The truth of the matter is that the WTO has not been able to live up to its expectation. A lot of trade disputes are happening across the world, and the WTO has not been able to do that, notably the trade dispute between US and China. Apart from that, we are expecting the new WTO DG to be non-aligned. We don't expect the new WTO DG to be aligned to either the US or the EU or China. She has to be non-aligned to be able to achieve results. Secondly, the global GDP this year is expected to drop by 5%, according to the World Bank and the World Economic Forum. So that implies that the new WTO DG is expected to advance trade. And how can she try that? How can she do that? It's very simple. Africa is starting a new economic integration in January. So we are expecting that the WTO will play a major role in removing barriers to trade. There are several barriers to trade across the world at the moment. There are several trade disputes. There are so many borders that are closed. Between Nigeria and the Benin Republic, several African countries have shut borders against each other. That should not continue. So we are expecting that the WTO will live up to its expectation by ensuring that some of these trade disputes are resolved. We are also looking ahead because in 2021, there is still some level of uncertainty due to coronavirus and due to several trade disruptions. So we are expecting that the new WTO DG will draw a roadmap for trade across the world. The world needs to trade more, and that is not happening.
Well, we do have to leave it there, but thank you so much, sir, for those great insights. Of course, that's Mr. Odinaka Anudu. He's a trade and economy editor at Business Day Nigeria. Well, let's move on now. Take a look at our corporate headlines today. Now, Bharti Airtel is exiting the Ghanaian market after selling off its stake in its joint venture telco to the West African nation. The exit will see the Ghanaian government own 100% of the business, which includes acquiring the Airtel Ghana customers, assets and agreed liabilities. Airtel has been doing business in Ghana under the brand name Airtel Tigo in partnership with Luxembourg-headquartered Millicom. Meanwhile, Kenyan fruits and vegetable delivery platform Twiga Foods has secured a $30 million loan from the International Finance Corporation and Tier 1 Kenyan banks. The loan will support over 300 irrigated medium-scale contract farmers to complement Twiga's seasonal smallholder farmer supply base. Twiga currently buys seasonal farm produce from about 19,500 smallholder farmers in Kenya. And the world's top smartphone maker, Samsung Electronics, has reported record revenues of $59 billion in its third quarter. The strong revenues were fueled by a 50% jump in smartphone sales, while profits from microchips rocketed 82%. The Korean tech giant also posted a net profit of $8.3 billion in the 3 months that ended in September. That's a 49% increase compared to the same period last year. And finally, French luxury goods group LVMH will pay slightly less to acquire U.S. jeweler Tiffany's after the two companies agreed to end a bitter dispute. The new takeover price now values Tiffany at $15.8 billion. That's over $400 million less than the $16.2 billion originally agreed upon. Now, the transaction is expected to close in early next year, subject to Tiffany shareholder approval. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a short break now, still coming up on the show. Egyptian and Sudanese officials discuss plans to build a railway link between the two North African nations. And Aliko Dangote delays the listing of his cement company in London.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now, Egyptian and Sudanese officials have met in Cairo to follow up on a project to link both nations through a railway and road link. The over 1,200-kilometer route will transport passengers between both nations as well as products and goods in order to foster bilateral trade and development. It is also the first phase of an ambitious project to connect Cairo with Cape Town. Here is Yasser Hakim with the details.
Egypt is speeding up the land transport connections with its southern neighbor after a one-year lull due to political upheavals in Sudan. Cairo has already constructed the railway infrastructure from Aswan to the Sudan border. When ready, the railway will link Egypt's Alexandria city on the Mediterranean Sea with Sudan's capital Khartoum.
The railway link will increase passenger movement, trade and cargo shipments with Sudan. Egypt is aggressively active in several African countries with infrastructure projects and investments in different sectors. Now it is pushing for the railway and road link to expand beyond Sudan and connect the whole continent economically, especially now there are countries with no sea access, so that they can transport their products via railway to different ports for shipping. I believe the land route will be the base to establish the dream of an African Union similar to the EU in Europe.
The cost of this railway link with Sudan has not been revealed, but Cairo says the Kuwait Fund for Economic Development will be an investor in the project. Like any project, there are some challenges that are being addressed by both sides.
There are challenges. One is technical. The two railway lines are different in width size, which makes it hard to link. Experts decided to construct the Sudan railway line according to Egypt's updated specifications. The other two challenges are funding and political will. Funding will be covered through loans and international funds. As for political will, it is obvious now, with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi pushing to finalize the project soon and the positive response from the current Sudanese leadership.
Besides the railway, there is another ambitious project for a land road that connects Egypt with Chad. Hassan Mehdi had been a board member of this project that's advising the Transportation Ministry.
It is part of the Cairo-Cape Town road that I have done feasibility studies on. Egypt has already upgraded the Asyut road and is developing the road from Aswan to Sudan borders. The road is very important to create economic integration between African countries, facilitating passenger transport and trade. It will add huge value to uniting the continent economically.
Intra-African trade has been much lower than the potential of the continent. Cairo hopes the railway and road routes could help raise trade and investment volumes, thus improving African economies. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And moving on now, Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, has again delayed plans to sell shares in his cement company on the London Stock Exchange. The billionaire is opting instead to focus on increasing exports and boosting the Nigerian company's foreign exchange reserves. Now, Dangote Cement, the continent's biggest producer of the building material, isn't expected to attempt a UK initial public offering until at least 2023. 63-year-old Aliko Dangote, who has a net worth of more than $14 billion, has long expressed his ambition for Dangote Cement to have a secondary London listing in order to diversify its ownership and gain access to cheaper funds on international markets. Meanwhile, economic activities in Nigeria's commercial city of Lagos are gradually returning to normal. This follows last week's protests against police brutality that led to shutdowns and a curfew in 4 states. Now, most business owners have taken advantage of the relative calm to resume operations, but others are still counting their losses following the prolonged unrest that disrupted movement of goods and services in the country. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with an update on that situation.
It's the first day this massive shopping mall in the heart of Lagos would be reopening after the violence that hit the city. But shop owners here are returning to virtually empty shops. All 150 shops in the Adeniro Ogunsanya Mall, the Surulere axis of Lagos, were completely looted. This shop sells clothes, but all the clothes are now gone. It's the same story for this perfume shop. Everything looted. And wait for this one, the liaison office of a university.
They broke into our shops, took accessories, printing press machines, they took computers, televisions. They also took so many things, so many effects that really affected us. Like they took close to over 10 million in worth what they've taken from the office.
Most of the capital here is from hedge funds, from venture capital, from banks, from finance companies, and loan raised from family and other individuals. It's a trading cycle here. You only live off of the commission. So I empathize with them. It is not easy to experience black economy. It was white economy before, but right now it's black economy for them.
For now, no trading is going on at the mall as the traders continue to take stock of their loss. It would certainly be a while before this place comes back to what it once was.
These people actually need help. As soon as those helps comes, then some of them that has insurance, those ones can access their insurance claim and then start business. But for those who are without insurance, certainly government will have to, one way or the other, assist them, because the earlier they come back, the earlier we're able to create jobs and we're able to restart the economy.
The Lagos state government is committed to assist those whose shops were looted in the violence. How quickly the government is able to mobilize their funds and get them to the traders will to some extent determine how quickly some of the looted shops in this shopping mall resume operations. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Now in Kenya, the livelihoods of millions of people have been impacted by COVID-19. The situation is even worse in low-income settlements where residents live on less than $1 a day. But as CGTN's Robert Nagila reports, a system referred to as the small economy allows them to put food on the table.
It's mid-morning in Kibra, Kenya's largest informal settlement. Many of its residents are casual laborers who've lost their jobs as a result of the economic downturn brought about by COVID-19.
About 250,000 people call this home. Most of them live on less than $1 a day. But despite the harsh conditions, the people here have come up with their own unique economy that gets them by.
Deep in the heart of the settlement, Lydia Sunday has come to her local shop for her weekly shopping. But this is not your average shopping trip. Known as the Kadogo economy or small economy, the principle behind it sees retailers selling goods in small quantities for as little as 5 cents.
Things like sugar and oil. The quantity depends on how much you have.
A 2011 World Bank study, however, shows low-income earners end up paying more than middle or even upper-income earners. Once her shopping's complete, she makes her way home through the narrow, muddy alleys in the settlement.
Today I bought flour for ugali and for baking, some vegetables, some soap, paraffin, sugar and bread.
The mother of 3 arrives at her one-room rented house and begins preparing lunch for the children.
I used to cook twice a day because a local school provided lunch for the children in the area. But now that schools are open, they have stopped.
Lunch today is vegetables and ugali made from maize flour and water. Up until March this year, she ran a small business but was forced to shut it because of COVID-19. She now depends on money from her family in the countryside and casual jobs within the settlement. She admits life is much tougher now than it was before the pandemic struck. But she's determined to see this period through for the sake of her children. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
You are watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now. Still to come. A post-Brexit deal inches closer into view as talks return to Brussels. And Germany to compensate firms amidst COVID-19 lockdowns.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Just about 5:30, let's recap today's top headlines. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, more than 15 people have been killed by assailants in the east of the country. The attack, which happened on Wednesday night in the remote village of Bayeti, was allegedly carried out by rebel fighters from Islamist militia group, the ADF. And the United States has rejected the front-running candidate to head the World Trade Organization, defying the body's other 160 member nations and leaving the outcome of the race uncertain. Now, Ngozi Okonjo Iweala, a former Nigerian finance minister, has attracted more widespread support to become the next Director General than her rival. But the U.S., critical of the WTO's handling of global trade, wants another woman, South Korea's Yoon Myung-hee, to take over, saying she could reform that body. And France is on high alert after 3 people were killed in a knife attack in the southern city of Nice. The French Prime Minister vowed a strong response to the attack. French media are quoting sources close to the investigation as saying the attacker was a 21-year-old Tunisian migrant. However, the authorities have not provided any further details. And finally, the Nigerian army has revealed that it acted on orders by the Lagos state government to help intervene in the #EndSARS protests, which turned violent. At least a dozen people died during the protest. Meanwhile, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation fears that there will be prolonged petrol scarcity as a result of curfews imposed to deal with potential violence. And that is a recap of today's top headlines. Let's get you some international news. To the ongoing Brexit trade talks, there are small signs of progress, while major issues still remain. The UK and the EU are trying to clinch a deal that will govern nearly $1 trillion in annual trade before informal membership. That's known as the transition period, ending at the end of this year. From Brussels, here's CGTN's Tony Waterman.
Brexit talks returned to Brussels on Thursday, and the EU's negotiating team has been in London for almost a week now as talks to complete this trade deal intensify. And while both sides say that big gaps remain, there are some signs that there have been small advancements made, particularly on competition guarantees, so ensuring that state aid isn't used to prop up companies and undercut competition. The UK has refused to carry on following EU rules on state aid, but David Frost, the UK chief negotiator, has suggested that as a compromise, Britain could perhaps agree on how subsidies are spent, which is actually quite standard in a lot of modern day trade agreements. The other issue that needs work is the dispute settlement mechanism, figuring out how this deal will be enforced. But at this point, the biggest holdup appears to be around fishing. How much access are European fishing boats going to have to UK waters? France, Ireland, the Netherlands, they have taken a hard line on this issue, although there are some reports that behind the scenes, the French government is telling the industry to prepare for a big change to the status quo. And in a leaked letter to a Welsh politician, Michael Gove has again insisted that the UK must be an independent coastal state and not answerable to EU law. But time is really running out, and there are just a few weeks left to clinch a deal if it is to be ratified by all 27 EU member states and in place for January 1st, when the Brexit transition period officially ends. So talks are expected to only intensify from here. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has pledged to offer more economic support for companies hurt by the COVID-19 pandemic. The move comes after Germany said it will impose a new month-long lockdown to reverse a spike in cases. Germany's growth prospects are bleak at the moment. The country's leading economic research institutes have revised their economic outlooks downward by roughly 1 percentage points for both 2020 and 2021. They now expect GDP to fall by 5.4% this year and to grow by 4.7% in 2021 and 2.7% in 2022. And moving on now, since Beijing's pilot free trade zone was officially unveiled in late September, companies in China's capital have been studying policy guidance to seek new growth opportunities. Here is CGTN's Zhang Yungfeng exploring how the policy has especially benefited the fashion industry.
Mr. Zhang Qinghui is the chairman of China Fashion Association. He's been busy lately organizing the ongoing China Fashion Week in Beijing. Zhang says he welcomes the Beijing Free Trade Zone as his organization is involved with service trade and international personnel exchanges.
This policy is great news for the fashion industry. The fashion industry involves a lot of international trade of design, intellectual property, and a lot of international education and training for designers. Hopefully, the free trade policies will make all these exchanges easier.
The Beijing municipal government has in recent years moved its entire manufacturing sector out of the city. Now over 80% of its GDP is generated from the service industry. In some districts, such as Chaoyang District, which resides the famous CBD area and 798 Cultural Area, where Zhang's organization is based at, have over 90% of their GDP concentrated on services, such as finance, commerce, technology and culture. Zhang says the new double development dynamic concept raised by the central government is also relevant to China's fashion industry, as China is now both the world's largest fashion producer and largest consumer.
The double development dynamic is very relevant for our industry. China is the world's #1 exporter of clothes and garments, and it's very competitive with skilled workers, entire supply chain and cost control. At the same time, China's domestic demand is also big enough to absorb a lot of the supply. China in 2019 surpassed the US to be the world's largest fashion market. So both domestic market and global market offer strong support to China's fashion industry.
Zhang also says he looks forward to detailed policies in Beijing's free trade zone. Those include investment and trade policies so that foreign fashion brands can enter China more easily, favorable visa policies to facilitate designer exchanges, as well as digital economy policies, as China's fashion industry has embraced technologies more than ever in both supply chain management and online sales channels. Zheng Junfeng, CGTN.
And executives from top U.S. tech companies have testified before the Senate in a contentious hearing to defend the way they do business. This comes as tech giant Google faces a lawsuit from the federal government over concerns it's monopolizing the search industry. Our reporter Mark New has those details.
We have contact with you.
The U.S. Department of Justice recently filed an antitrust lawsuit against Google. It accuses the company of unlawfully maintaining monopolies through anti-competitive practices in search and search advertising.
This new lawsuit against Google is really just the beginning of what is going to be an extended conversation in the United States about antitrust in the 21st century.
The civil suit says that Google accounts for almost 90% of all search queries in the United States. It also accuses Google of entering into exclusive agreements that forbid the pre-installation of competing search services.
Does the market sound highly competitive to you when you have 90% of it?
Very brief answer.
Many publishers can use simultaneously many tools. Amazon and Trade Desk alone have grown significantly in the last 2 years. This is a market in which we share majority of our revenue. Our margins are low. We are happy to take feedback here.
Feedback turned partisan as the CEOs of Google, Facebook, and Twitter appeared before a Senate committee on Wednesday. At the heart of the hearing was whether to remove or modify Section 230, a controversial internet law which prevents internet companies from being treated as the speakers or publishers of information provided by another information content provider. Republican Senator Ted Cruz blasted Twitter for blocking an article from the New York Post that claimed Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden's son, Hunter, had dealings with a Ukrainian official.
Who the hell elected you and put you in charge of what the media are allowed to report and what the American people are allowed to hear? And why do you persist in behaving as a Democratic super PAC?
We're not doing that. And this is why I opened this hearing with calls for more transparency. We realize we need to earn trust more.
While all the CEOs agreed on the need for more transparency, Dorsey went further by supporting the idea of algorithmic choice, giving users more power over what content they see in their feeds.
And their algorithms are focused on engagement and growth, and not really so much on whether it's the truth or not.
Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal asked the companies whether they had plans in case President Trump says without evidence that the election has been rigged or calls for the counting of votes to stop.
We do. We have policies related to all of the areas that you just mentioned. Candidates or campaigns trying to delegitimize methods of voting or the election, candidates trying to prematurely declare victory, and candidates trying to spread voter suppression material.
Both Zuckerberg and Dorsey are scheduled to appear before the Senate Judiciary Committee in mid-November to answer questions over their handling of the 2020 election. Mark New, CGTN, Mountain View, California.
And aviation giant Boeing says it is planning to shed another 7,000 jobs by the end of next year. The American plane maker reported its fourth straight quarterly loss on Wednesday, as sales are hammered by the pandemic and the grounding of 737 MAX jets. Now, the company is focused on cutting costs as it prepares for a long slump in demand. While Boeing is adding some jobs in its defense unit, an estimated 19,000 employees are leaving the company this year. Meanwhile, Hungary's Tokaj region, home of the world's most expensive wine, is set to benefit from a new agreement between the EU and China on protecting 200 geographical indications. The agreement will stop the Tokaj name being imitated on products that don't originate from the region, and winemakers hope this will help consumers tell the difference between high-end and lower-end wine. Isobel Ewing reports.
Nestled on the edge of Hungary's Zemplén Mountains is a winemaking region that dates back centuries. More recently, the Chinese consumer has developed a taste for Tokai's famous sweet wine, and it's hoped the new agreement will promote it further.
It is very important to build our partnership with our importers, because Tokai has a very small production, but very good quality. So we need reliable partners. We need then selling points in hotels, in restaurants, in clubs. And what we experienced the last years, collectors, very knowledgeable collectors, are buying more and more our wines in China as well.
Collectors are most interested in Essencia, the world's most expensive wine. The 2008 1.5-litre Magnum retails for a whopping $40,000. This is partly due to the labour-intensive process it takes to make it. The grapes are hand-picked after they've developed botrytis, a fungus that dries out the fruit on the vine. The result is these wrinkled raisins called asu berries.
Essencia is the richest and rarest wine, not only in Tokai, but the entire world. In this vat is 500 kilograms of asu berries, which will eventually become a dozen bottles of Essencia.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Essencia is fermented in this 13th century cellar, used as a hiding place during the Ottoman invasions, now thick with mould, which serves the important role of maintaining the humidity level.
He's feeding from the evaporation of the barrels, so himself is a good Tokai drinker as well.
Historically, Essencia has been a symbol of wealth, believed to be strength-giving and even an aphrodisiac. Its properties legendary as far away as Beijing.
Our biggest Essencia buyer in the world is an older Chinese lady who is taking a spoonful each morning to keep her strong and her husband strong as well.
A smaller winemaker nearby hopes the new protection will help his winery get a foothold in the Chinese market.
I would like to use this opportunity to show the Chinese people my wines. I know that there are a lot of wine lovers there, so I hope they fall in love with my wines, especially organic bio Tokai wines.
And at just $10 a bottle, Gabor Harshanyi's late harvest sweet wine is a taste of Tokai without the eye-watering price tag. Isabel Ewing, CGTN, Budapest.
Now, lockdown life does inspire ideas and stimulate creativity. In London, musicians are using an interactive hologram based on Victorian technology to reach their fans stuck indoors due to the coronavirus pandemic.
Let me introduce Dan Upson, coming live from Mile End.
British technology company Musion 3D teamed up with Faroe Island singer Dan Olsen to launch Fanshare. Fanshare is a modern twist on an illusion technique known as Pepper's Ghost, involving a huge sheet of glass which was used in theaters in the 1860s.
It's the closest you're going to get to a virtual image, a virtual likeness, shall I say, of the real human being. You don't need glasses, you don't need a headset. You're sitting here as if you're watching a regular stage show.
Please let me introduce to you my guitarist today.
Olsen and the guitarist played in a small studio in East London. Well, their images were projected onto a stage in central London where the piano player was performing live. The hologram technology allows a performer to be anywhere in the world, ideal in the time of rapidly changing restrictions on public life caused by the pandemic.
It looks like all three of us are on stage playing at the same time, but two of us are holograms. The timing couldn't be better to do this now, because people are looking like, how can we play to an audience, because we can't get musicians to travel and do tours. And all of a sudden with this, you can do it anywhere in the world, and you can be anywhere in the world.
In the long run, Musion wants to accomplish with live music what Netflix did for television, creating a system for getting gigs to people's mobile phones. Chige, CGTN.
And on that note, let's take a look at commodity markets today. Oil prices falling more than 3%. They extended the previous day's sharp declines. Now, of course, oil prices have been under pressure from signs of a growing global oil supply glut, as, of course, governments renew restrictions to counter a resurgence in coronavirus cases. Both Brent crude and WTI contracts plunged by more than 5% in trading yesterday. Meanwhile, gold prices edging up after a plunge in the previous session. Those surging global coronavirus cases and, of course, fears of a contested U.S. presidential election did spur some demand today, though a stronger dollar did cap gold's gains. Well, let's take a short break now, still coming up on the show. Kenyan innovators develop a platform for people to connect to artisans.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Shirushi, Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, more and more young people around Africa are venturing into the informal sector, seeking to create jobs. They are basically using innovations to pursue their dreams while creating employment in the process. One of them is Alex Kamanga. He is a Kenyan entrepreneur and founder of Fundis, which is an online app. Well, CGTN's Wanja Mungai caught up with him and filed his story.
It's early morning and Charlene Kamau is plying her trade. At the age of 20, she's already pursuing her passion as a plumber. She works at Fundis, a startup company based in Nairobi, Kenya.
I started this profession after school, whereby I joined Fundis. This was my first place to work, which was in 2019. I've actually learned more than plumbing, whereby I relate with electricians, painters. So in the line of work, I've learned more than plumbing, whereby I can actually learn a little bit of electrical work, because at the same point, you go to sites with them and you learn more.
Fundis is a Swahili word for artisans. The startup was established in 2019 as an online platform that connects artisans with clients.
It's very hard to find a repair person when you need one. How and where do you find a repair expert when you really need one? So what Fundis does is simply we smoothen that process. We enable workers, these repairmen, to find jobs regularly, while you as a customer, from the point of just your mobile phone, you can be able to be joined with a technician any place.
His app has a network of 2,000 artisans spread across the country. To book, one needs to select the required service on their smartphone and key in a description. You'd also need to attach a picture of the problem you need fixed. The team will then connect you with an artisan who will give a job quotation.
They've always been very efficient. What I like most about them is it's a matter of a phone call, and in 20-30 minutes you have a Fundi who arrives at your place of repairs.
Kenya is ranked as a leading tech hub in Africa, and with startups like Fundis coming up rapidly, that could be the answer to the youth unemployment dilemma. The Kenya National Bureau of Statistics says the unemployment rates in the country have doubled. The rate is at 10% compared to 5% in March, when the country recorded the first coronavirus case. Those working with Fundis consider themselves lucky during these tough economic times.
The return is good because now we have many clients, so I can't complain. Fundis app has really helped us.
The job comes with its challenges, though. For Shalene, being so young and a woman in a male-dominated field presents a fair share of trials and tribulations.
The moment you step into someone's compound and then they're like, wow, you're the one coming to do that. And is that part of it where people don't actually believe you can do it?
Fundis hope to extend their services beyond Kenyan borders and to include more services in its app's offerings. Wanja Mungai, CGTN, Nairobi.
Well, Nigeria has seen an uptick in small-scale fishing amidst the coronavirus pandemic. The West African nation has a coastline stretching more than 850 kilometers. Now, the growing number of fishermen is in turn driving growth in other businesses in the sector. Well, CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam visited a traditional boat maker in Ibono, one of the country's largest fishing settlements.
Sawing and hammering, one piece after another. Effiong Okon piecing all the elements together. He's been in the boat-making business for over 3 decades. Depending on the size, Okon charges between $420 to $500 for just the wooden boat. It takes him about a week to complete it.
I make around 40,000 naira per sale after expenses. And I am motivated to do this business because it helps me earn a living for me and my family. I hope to expand my business to some other part of this community.
Boat making and boat rentals are highly lucrative businesses here in Akwa Ibom. The southeastern Nigerian state has some of the largest fishing settlements. That's where Okon gets most of his patronage.
The boats are made from very good materials. When we buy them from him, we decorate it however we please for ease of identification. Each boat costs 180,000. Painting and accessorizing brings it to about 200,000 naira. Then we spend another 1.8 million naira on the outboard engine cost.
But like the fishing business, Okon's business booms during the high season from March to November.
Times when fishing activities are low and business is slow, I could stay for 3 months without building a boat. If I'm lucky enough, I may get a job to repair a boat.
Despite seasonal lulls, Okon is looking to expand his business in the near future.
I intend to open up another workshop and send some of my trainees there. That will bring in some more income for us.
Local fishers in the area say an estimated 50 boats bring in fish from the sea weekly. Unemployment has continued to surge across the country amid the coronavirus pandemic. It's led to a higher demand for boats as people turn to fishing as an alternative source of income. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Ibono, Nigeria.
Well, before we leave you today, a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand coming off early gains to trade flat today. It took little support from a government pledge to freeze public sector wages for the next 3 years to contain a yawning budget deficit, as of course the government also forecast high debt levels. Now in Nigeria, Forex turnover dropped by about 47.5% as Nigeria's exchange rate at the NAFEX window appreciated against the dollar to close at 384 to 385 per dollar during intraday trading. The naira continues to hover between 460 to 465 naira per dollar at the parallel market as businesses open up after relaxation of curfews. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.